Today we're having a Strategy U chat with Robbie Crabtree, and he is a former trial attorney and somebody that is carving his own path and passionate about speaking, persuasion, and telling powerful stories. We're going to dive in today and talk about how you think about structuring a story, which should be fun. We'll take some of the things I've learned about using persuasion and from consulting and see how it matches up with how he thinks about it from a bit higher stakes, helping people get overcome challenging criminal offenses and giving them a proper defense. So welcome to this conversation, Robbie. Do you have anything more to add that I did not get that might be relevant or about storytelling and these tactics?
I'll just kind of start off, Paul, with saying stories are incredibly powerful. And there's a reason stories, if we go back to ancient Greece, when we talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey, were passed on from generation to generation because they taught children and taught people in that society lessons about life, lessons about the gods, lessons that they thought were necessary to pass on. And if we think about it in that framework, we continue to study those same stories today, and the power that they have to teach lessons and to guide us and give us ideas. That's why I'm so passionate about stories, because of that background, but also what I've seen it do kind of in my own personal career experience as a trial lawyer and what it was able to achieve in those situations.
So working as an attorney, when was the first time you realized that it was not just about knowing all the precedents and all the technical law, and it was actually much more than that?
Oh, you're throwing me on the spot, and I've got to talk about a time I lost, which is rough. And I was trying a case, and I was actually a prosecutor at the time, and I had the law on my side, I had the facts on my side, but I didn't tell a compelling story. And I thought, you know what? If I just have the law and the facts, I'm good. The jury's going to go with me. And that was a harsh lesson to learn, because what actually happened is jury came back not guilty on that case. And I saw the jury talking to the defendant out in the hallway. So I wanted to listen and see what they had to say, because it's always interesting to hear what a jury has to say after the fact. So I sat there and I listened, and their words to him were, "Look, we know that you made a mistake. Just don't do it again. We gave you this break." I sat there in shock, because what had happened is they were telling him that they did think he was guilty of the offense, but I didn't convince them enough with my story that it was important enough that they needed to take action. And instead they let him off. And I learned from that. I've got to make sure it is appealing to their emotions and that they do what I asked them to do.
Amazing. So talk to me about how you, as somebody from a law background, thinks about story. Like, what are some of the technical things you're actually doing as you're building the facts of a case and trying to think about what the either some of the speeches you're delivering to the jury or the judge or in front of the court? What does that process look like for you?
For me, that process is kind of two different things I've got to really think about. The first is, how am I going to structure that story? And that is, what is the most powerful moment in that story, right? I think too many people fall into this trap, and they say a story, that means I start at the beginning and I just tell it step by step by step to the end. Except I think we can all acknowledge that most of the time the beginning of a story is really not that interesting. I love to think back when I first started reading Harry Potter. I read the first 10 pages and I put the book down. I didn't pick it back up for a year until some friends finally pushed me into it, because I thought those first 10 pages were really boring. So I always keep that in mind as I'm thinking, how do I create this structure? It's got to be engaging. You've got to drop them into the action. So that's kind of the first piece. And there's a lot more to go into that, and we can certainly do that. But the second piece is, how do I not just make it the highest action moment, but how do I make my audience feel like they're there? How do I actually transport them to that scenario, right? I want them to feel like they're in a movie or a television show. I want them to feel like there's music playing, or they can smell the air, they can feel the temperature. They just are an active spectator in that actual story. Instead of looking at it through a lens where there's a screen in front of them, I want them to be a character in my play. And so I'm thinking about, how do we create that? What sensory words and descriptions and styles can I bring to the story to really put them into that position?
I love that. And I see a lot of parallels. So maybe we dive into one at a time. We have structure, and then how you bring alive the audience in the story. So in structure, in consulting, a lot of people default to the pyramid principle. And the pyramid principle is basically what you just said. It's, you start with the takeaway. You tell the client or the audience, this is the biggest insight. This is what matters. And then you walk them through how you got there. Now, there's different tactics depending on if you're dealing with a hostile audience. Sometimes you might want to be more subtle and not give them the direct takeaway. But that's definitely a parallel for consulting and law. And that is not an intuitive jump for people. What I notice is a lot of people, we have so much information now that and I guarantee a lawyer is probably even more extreme in this regard. You spend 100 hours researching stuff. And part of the challenge is you want the audience to know, hey, I worked really hard on this. But it may be true that a 2-minute story is going to be more interesting and memorable and actually get them to take action than going deep into every single step that you took. Does that resonate with how you think about it too?
So I love that, because I think the biggest mistake most people make when they're giving some sort of public speech or trying to be persuasive in the way that they speak is they think about themselves. They think about, I want to feel a certain way. I want to do something. I want to make sure I give the best speech. But that's not your audience. Everything should be geared towards, how does my audience feel? How does it get my audience where I want them to go? And when you make that distinction and you start approaching it as, I want my audience to get this takeaway, what you're saying is a 2-minute speech, maybe better than that 30-minute speech that I could give, is spot on. And that was another hard lesson I learned over time, is I started asking for less and less time from a judge to deliver a closing argument, because I knew if I did it in 5 minutes when the other attorney did it in 15, that jury would like me a whole lot more, because I got to the point and I made it more powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, there can be a certain power too, to even outlasting, I imagine. Like if you are able to hold the attention for 60 minutes, you could kind of just exhaust the audience too. But I'm huge in favor of the shorter rather than longer.
Yeah, this takes me back, and we were talking previously to a statement that I just love, and it's a Don Draper quote. And I frame decisions in life this way. I frame how I create stories and speeches this way, and it is, make it simple but significant. And if I can do that, it's going to be successful. And that kind of goes back to also your earlier point about the structure and that pyramid that you were talking about. You were spot on when you said, sometimes you need to be direct and sometimes you need to be subtle. Because sometimes we want the audience to know exactly what this highest tension moment is and how they should act because of it. But other times we just want to intrigue them, right? We want to set them up, kind of plant that seed so they listen to us, right? The example I love to use there is in Fight Club, we have Edward Norton Jr. is seated as Project Mayhem takes place. And we have no idea how he got there. And yes, that's a high moment, but then they go back and you get to build up to that moment and learn kind of how he got there. I think that's such an intriguing way of setting it up, where I'm wondering, how did this happen, right? It's not you're in the middle of it and now we build from there. It's tell me how we got here. I think that's such an interesting way to set up a structure of the story.
Yeah, so let's talk about that second aspect. You were talking about bringing the audience member into the story. So the principle there I think about and that many people don't think about when giving a presentation is it's not about proving to the audience, I have this information that you need to follow. It's actually, there's almost always, I want you to take this action at X point in the future. So stepping back, mapping that decision and saying, okay, when do we want them to make that decision? Then how do we think about the story? Do you think about the trigger points when you're thinking about how you communicate?
Absolutely. Right. It's the same thing. I have an action I want my audience to take. And so I've got to figure out how I get them to take that action. And a lot of times that's done by making them feel a part of the story. Right. And that can be, sometimes it can be fairly graphic, to be completely honest. You can use language that is shocking. And one of the things I look for when giving that kind of speech, that kind of presentation, is I'm looking for visible cues from my audience to make sure that it is resonating, that they feel like they're in that situation. And that could be they start crying. That could be they back up because they're shocked at what they heard. That could be when you go really soft and are telling something really delicate or something moving, when they move in and actually want to listen to you because they're so interested. And so you're always looking for those trigger points where you're saying, look, this is the point where if I get them to be engaged, I can turn them and get them where I need them to go.
I think the hardest thing is actually improving. And one of the biggest roadblocks to this is the fact that people rarely actually get feedback on how they're doing. How did you get feedback and improve on things?
Luckily for me, juries like to talk.
That's true. I guess, that's one of the elements you need for good feedback is something that can be like scored or valued. And I guess a win or lose will give you that. Well, you were saying there's more though.
Oh, for sure. I mean, what they actually do is at the end, they give their verdict, right? And we would then go back to the room, the jury room where they're seated, and talk to them. And after every trial, I did this. And I can tell you, most of the time, I did not want to go back there. I was exhausted. It'd be a week-long trial, 2-week-long trial, and I'm dead. I'm ready to go. Just that adrenaline dump is there. But you know what? They gave their time. I'll go back there and listen. And now as I look back, I'm incredibly happy that I took that opportunity every single time. Because what they do is they tell you what worked and what didn't. What did they remember? What was effective? What wasn't effective? Did your theme stand out? Did that descriptive language make an impact on them? Did something that maybe I thought was clear, was it really murky to them? And vice versa. How did they take my words and use them? So I was fortunate that I got a lot of feedback from juries. I got feedback from my mentors who were very hands-on with me, which was advantageous. But I also sought it out from other people. And I was one of those annoying friends and annoying family members who just constantly pitched ideas to people and would say, hey, you got 5 minutes? Can I run this by you? And I would break out into some sort of closing argument or some sort of speech and see what they thought. And, after 10 or 20 deliveries on a specific speech, it's amazing how much better that gets.
So I'm going to run a couple tactics by you if I'm taking what I know from consulting and apply them to your situation. You tell me if you think they're effective, what I could do different, or maybe you just have tactics of your own to add. So when we're getting back to the trigger, thinking about the action, right? If I were thinking about a jury, I would actually think about their deliberation process and explicitly say that. So I would say in my closing argument, when you're in that jury room and you're analyzing the data and you're feeling a little anxious, you don't know what you're going to do, you're thinking about this fact or that fact, and you don't want to know what to do, I want you to think about this. What do you think? Score me.
First off, I think you're well on your way to being a trial lawyer already. If you already have that nailed down, I think that's a great approach. That's certainly one that I think is effective. The way I actually did it was slightly different, but a very similar approach. And what I would do is in jury selection, I would make them a promise. I'd promise them that I'm going to prove my case and that I'm going to give them everything that they need to say either guilty or not guilty, depending on which side I was on. And then what I make them do in jury selection is I make each and every single one of them make a promise to me that when I fulfill my promise, they will fulfill theirs and say guilty or not guilty, depending on which one I ask for. So then what I do in closing argument, because I've set up that seed, is I actually go and say, look, when you're back there, just remember, I promised you I would do my job, and I have. Now it's your time to go back there and fulfill your promise and do your job.
And that's classic Cialdini's reciprocity principle.
I know who he is. I've just never read any of his work, so I'm glad it tracks.
Yeah, he wrote about these 6 persuasion principles, and that's like a very key one that keeps people consistent. So another one, I've coached people giving live presentations, and one big thing you can do is use more powerful words. So one of those words, talking about what you were talking about before to transport somebody into the story, is starting with something like, imagine you're 3 months down the road and we just launched this product and the product is struggling a little, and you call your chief operations officer and realize that we instituted this initiative that enables you to actually save some of the challenge you're making, right? I'm speaking very broadly right now, but how does that work in terms of transporting somebody into a different state?
So I love using terms like imagine.
Yeah, like other power words too.
So I love to think of imagine, put yourself in this person's shoes. Even contemplate can be one that sometimes gets used, but I tend to probably use imagine the most myself as well, just because I think that's the easiest way to give a powerful word but not speak above my audience, right? Everyone understands that. Sometimes I'll say visualize, right? Or even just as simple as think about. It's not a really powerful thing, but it forces them to take action. And what you do is, it's not just the word itself. It is how you're phrasing it and delivering it. So I would love to put a really powerful pause after when I say that. Imagine you were walking down the street, right? Because then they're geared up. They're cued in that I've got to actually do something, because he's giving me that moment to kind of put myself in that mindset.
I love that. So I want to wrap up. What does a trial attorney know? And as somebody that coaches people on speaking, that a nerdy, analytical, numbers-driven consultant does not know or could use help with?
I mean, I am sure that you know this, but I think a lot of people make this mistake. And it is that logic and reason don't sell. It is all emotion. Now, you need logic and reason to back up that emotion.
Right.
But if you give people all the numbers, all the data, and it doesn't move them emotionally, they're not selling, which means you have to make some sort of emotional impact on your audience. And I think that is kind of that lesson I learned early on, where I had the law and the facts on my side, but I didn't move my audience emotionally like the defendant did, and I lost. And so I think there's this real struggle for people to grasp why they're not getting the results they want when they're producing this great logical analysis or all of these reasons. But I'm a big fan of another saying that I like to use is, there are no facts, there's only perspectives. Because one person's facts are not another person's facts, which means we've got to find a way to really think about it and frame it in a way that connects emotionally. And that's been the biggest change in my career that brought about true success, was figuring out how we draw on that emotion and connect with that audience to actually get them to do that call to action, to take that next step that I want them to do.
Yeah, and that is one of the hardest things when early consultants start. They get so frustrated because they run up against a senior executive. You show him all these facts and you show him it's true, and he's like, don't believe it. Mm-hmm. And I would actually push back a little. I don't think it's that facts don't matter. I think it's that you need to communicate why those facts matter and what it means to them, right? So, meaning and why it matters, those can be factual too. It's just about figuring out how does this information actually connect to what this person cares about. And that's one of the most powerful things I learned as well.
I totally agree with that. And that's why I say they're perspectives. And perspectives take into account those facts, right? And it's how you're shaping them so that it resonates with your audience. And I think you're spot on. If you can do that, you sell all day long.
Awesome. So I think we've trained future consultants, current consultants, or people just following Strategy U to use some of these tactics. Let us know in the comments if they're helpful, useful, or if you have questions for us. And Robbie is developing a course right now. I'll link it up in the YouTube around performative speaking. Definitely check out what he's doing. I think it builds on a lot of the things I'm teaching with Strategy U and probably takes it to the next level. So thanks for this, Robbie, and we will hopefully do a couple more of these.
Awesome, Paul. I really appreciate it. It's been great.